officium apostolatis elementum ipsumque ad Domino Didim, quod interpretator Genealogy. I'm a retired professor from the University of Applied Sciences in Belgrade, former Yugoslavia and now Serbia. For the last 2 years of those, I was president of the university. I lectured in history, politics and economics, but I've always been fascinated by history and what history can teach us. I'm a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. And I suppose that I got interested in this in a sense because when I started doing my own family's genealogy, I discovered that the Montgomerys were very close cousins to the Royal House of Normandy. The Royal House of Normandy in turn descended from what I have called the Wunga dynasty. And in fact, the people who planned and executed the conquest of England were actually 5 cousins. William of Normandy, Beaumont, Fitzosborne and Montgomery. And those 5 were third cousins to each other. And not just third cousins to him, but third cousins to each other. They're all intermarried in most, really sort of what I call the plaited cord. And I then thought, well, that's interesting. Where did they come from? And they actually come from a marriage with a guy called Ataulf, who at that time was king or leader of the Visigoths, who claimed descent from Odin, and Maria of the Elchisites, who claimed descent from Jesus via his daughter Maria.
And at that time it didn't really bother anybody that somebody was claiming descent from Jesus?
No, why should it? I mean, so what? I mean, the point about it is that, she was claiming descent from the Davidic line. In other words, a ruling group who, at that stage in history, was becoming very important. I mean, after all, Charlemagne, used to call himself Filius Davidi, the son of David. This was this royal claim. Okay, so the church to proclaim Jesus divine, but that wasn't the point, really. I mean, as far as I was concerned, it was simply that Jesus was descended, according to the various genealogies that exist within the Bible, from David. Okay, and according to the various genealogies which exist in Norse mythology and Mercian mythology, etc., then Ataulf was descended from Odin. But incidentally, Ataulf was not called Ataulf probably during his lifetime. He was called originally Uffa, or Ulf. Ata simply means father of, or the ancestor. Just like Ataturk, his name's something of a camel, a Mustafa camel.
Yeah,
right? And but he's called Ataturk, the father of the Turks. So it's a title which was given to him. So just as Ulf became the father of his dynasty, so he was called Ataulf. And this is why I call the dynasty that's descended from him Ulvunga, you see, the folk of Ulf. I have traced the probable lineage of Maria back to Jesus. Because the documentation that exists, there are various gaps in it. Okay? If you have a look at the document, for example, which I call the House of Bethany, it shows a descent from Jesus by Elchisias to Maria. But there's not enough generations. So what I had to do was to try and figure out what those generations missing were and who they were. And I was able to do it through a number of ways. A very useful person is Malachi Martin and his Fall of the Catholic Church, or Fall of the Roman Church, as he called it, Decline and Fall of the Roman Church. And he gives actually the lineages of certain of Jesus' family. And he says there are 3 well-known, legitimate, authorised descents from Jesus' family. Wow! Excuse me!
What period is that?
Oh, this is from the year 318 about. don't know if everyone knows about the Gospel of Philip, but it's part of the Nag Hammadi group of things. There are Greek fragments of it which have been dated to between 87 and 100 AD. Okay? So they are older than any of the canonical Gospels. And normally, under normal historical conditions, you would say if something is nearer to an event, it has more validity than something that's further away. Okay? So why should we change it just because we're talking about Jesus?
It's not been through anybody else's hands.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Absolutely none. While as we know, because Eusebius said so, that he rewrote the Gospels after 325 AD.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so what does it say here? It says, there were three who always walked with the Lord: Mary his mother, the sister of his mother, and Miriam of Magdala, known as his companion, in brackets, koinonis. And then it goes on and says, for him, Miriam is a sister, a mother, and a wife. Again, the word koinonis. Now let's be quite clear. Koinonis comes from the Greek verb koinon, meaning to copulate with or to mate with.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
It's very Egyptian. It's very Egyptian, this, isn't it?
Oh yes. So Mary, his mother, the sister of his mother, in other words his aunt, and Miriam of Magdala, who was known as his companion or koinonis. So obviously she was not considered his wife, presumably she was his concubine. But it is possible that she was a second wife, which may mean the difference. And I guess that she was the person, probably the younger of the two wives, who went with him on all his trips. Okay? Whilst the elder wife would be back home. So, let's go on then. Miriam then is a sister. So, he actually has a sister called Miriam. Okay? It's also the name of his mother, and it's the name of his wife. Not Mary Magdalene, someone else. As I was showing later on, she was called Mary of Bethany. So, that is the first part. Now the question is this backed up by others? This book is simply something that I had bound to put a whole lot of individual documents. They are documents which come from a variety of mostly private collections in the United States, Canada, Europe, etc. And the first of these is called the Abdias manuscript. Okay? Abdias was the name taken upon consecration by a guy called Obadiah, or more correctly, Abdias. He was almost certainly of the Petrine royal house and was probably the grandson of Aretas V by one of his daughters. And he was installed as the first bishop of Babylon, not by the Catholic Church, but by the Jerusalem Church, and was consecrated either by, well, possibly James or Judah, or possibly Judas or Thaddeus.
Can we just explain for people what the difference between Catholic Church and Jerusalem
Sure.
Church is?
Okay. The Catholic Church started basically with Pope Sylvester in 316 AD. Prior to that, the Jerusalem Church had been the, if you like, the controlling church of Judaic Christianity or Hebrew Christianity. There were 4 family bishoprics: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, and Ephesus. Okay? And each of those went to a particular member of Jesus' family, descendants in other words, right? And in fact, the Ephesus one was usually female.
Right.
Right? If there was a female available. Because she'd taken over from Diana of the Ephesians. They wanted to have a female in charge, so they made a female bishop.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that there have been a female bishops, terribly sorry gentlemen, balderdash.
Not entitled to it.
Right. This manuscript was originally written in Hebrew in the 1st century. It was translated into Latin in the 2nd century. The translation is attributed to Julius Africanus, but almost certainly wasn't by him. It was probably done by a scribe of his or someone who would have attributed to his patron.
Right.
Just as, for example, almost all of the epistles of Paul were not written by Paul.
No.
You know, they were written by who knows who and attributed to Paul.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong about the attribution.
No, self-deception.
It's perfectly normal. I attribute this to you, my lord, or whoever it is. Thank you very much. I accept it. You know, that's how it was. And this copy is courtesy of the Norris collection of the Dickinson College in the USA, who have the only complete collection of Abdias that I've come across, and I am now the proud possessor of the only other copy. Book number 6. Simon Chananeos or Chananeas cognomine, ac Judas, qui Abdias et Jacobus, quem fratrem Domini quidem appellant. Simon Chananeos or Chananeas, as he's known, also as Judas, who, with Thaddeus and Jacobus, which is James, are called the brothers of the Lord. Fratres Germanae fuerunt. They were his real brothers, or his blood brothers. Ex Chana or ex Hannah Galilea oriundi. In other words, they were by Hannah, in other words, Joseph's second wife. Joseph had 2 wives, Mary, who they called Mary the Virgin, if you like, and Hannah. So, Hannah was his second wife, and she is the mother of Simon, Chananeas, and Judas and Thaddeus. Okay? It then goes on to say that Joseph produced Jacob, right? His father, on his wife Mary, ad carnem, by way of the flesh. In other words, they had perfectly normal sexual intercourse to produce Jacob.
No Holy Spirit's there then?
No Holy Spirit's there, not really. Okay? So, let's just recap a moment. We've got Joseph having 2 wives, Mary and Hannah, and he has children by both.
In the normal old-fashioned
way. In the normal old-fashioned way. Beatum Tom, edificium apostolatis elementum ipsumque ad domino didimum, quod interpretator Geminus. In other words, the blessed Thomas, himself Didymus to the Lord, which is to be interpreted his twin. Okay, so Jesus had a twin brother. The word of the secret. They're revealed by the living Yeshua. Note, not dead, the living Yeshua. Didymus, Judas, Thomas wrote them down. So there we are, his real name, Judas. And he's called Judas Thomas because you have to differentiate him between the half-brother Judas who we've seen in that book, right? Who is the son of Hannah. Okay? Whilst this is the twin brother of Jesus. So here we have 2 different books, 3 different books, all confirming bits of the story.
If Jesus has a twin,
Yes.
then that means that the Holy Spirit brought 2 of God's little seeds down.
Well, let me put it this way. One of the things that happened at the Council of Nicaea was that the ante-Nicene fathers got up and actually asked the question. And it's down, it's in writing, and it says quite clearly, if Jesus is divine, is his twin divine? And if they are divine, are their children divine? And these questions were actually asked at the Council of Nicaea. And Athanasius got up and said, no, this is all lies, it never happened. But there's something more interesting. The Gospel of Judas. Okay? If you read the Gospel of Judas, it's very obvious that this person is very close to Jesus. He's more than just a disciple. I thought, well, could he be the half-brother? He's obviously not Judas Thomas because he's done something else. But could this be Judas's half-brother? This is the manuscript number 481-51-100 in the Yale University Collection of Rare Books and Manuscripts. And it says, talking about Jesus' half-brothers, Simon, Itaque Chananeas, who we've seen in that one, and Judas Zelotes. Zelotes means zealot. Another word for the zealots was Sychari. Sychari is also translated as Iscariot. So, Judas Iscariot was his half-brother. Now, is it likely that he would betray him? I mean, let's face it, in history there are many, many times when brothers have betrayed brothers. But is it in fact a betrayal? Or is it something that the church dreamt up? Just think about it. What better way of getting smearing than to actually smear his own half-brother as his betrayer? And the Romans did this continuously. You look at what they said about the Carthaginians. They were always smearing people who were their enemies. And this would have been a typical bit of Roman propaganda. To smear the very half-brother, the person who was one of the closest, apart from his twin, to Jesus. To smear him with the idea that he was the betrayer. It is the genealogies, or one of the genealogies, which was produced at the Council of Nicaea by the family, right? And this is interesting. It starts off with Davidic Solomon Genuit, Exo Soli Uriah Hittite. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it does, if you have a look in today's Bible, the authorized version, for example, it says, who was produced on the wife of she who had been the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Here it is saying, oh no, Solomon was produced by David whilst Uriah was still married to Bathsheba. Somewhat different. Okay? So in other words, legally, who was the legal father? The answer is Uriah the Hittite. So Solomon, legally, was the son of Uriah the Hittite, even though the real father may have been David. It's interesting. Anyway, we go on. Josephus ex Marie genuit Jesu. So Joseph produced Jesus from Mary. Et equus fratres Judas et Jacobus, and his brothers Judas and Jacob, right? Et Jesu genuit exosori Marie de Bethany. Okay? And Jesus, on his wife, Mary of Bethany, or Bethany. Now there, unfortunately, we've got breaks. Okay? This is extremely
big statement, though, isn't it?
It's a pretty obvious statement, yeah. But then we have Saulus Philia. So, what did that mean? Of the house of Saul? That's what I've suggested. Ke Marie Ethiopia Philius. Again, I think that this is referring to Mary Magdalene, who's often referred to as the Ethiopian.
Yeah.
Now that's my opinion, but the trouble is we can't prove it. Okay? But then we go on to this one. Here it says, Marie et Jesu Maria genuit. Marie et Sigismundus Ruth et echos frata genuit. Ruth esot meos el Josias genuit. El Josias Marthana et Martha genuit. Maria ex semina sancto el Josias viro ata nuit. Maria et ata Clodomirus genuit, Clodomirus Merolus genuit. Okay. Mary and Jesus produced Mary. Mary and a guy called Sigismundus produced Ruth and his brother. Ruth and a guy called Osmaeus produced Elchasias. Elchasias produced Martha and Marthana, and Maria, who was from the seed of the holy Elchasai, married the man Atta. Okay? Maria and Atta, Clodomirus produced Clodomirus, and Clodomirus produced Merovius.
We're getting instances throughout history where it doesn't really matter that Jesus had kids.
Absolutely not. I mean, it wasn't until the Council of Nicaea. What actually happened was that Constantine became Roman Empire. He wanted not only to control, if you like, the civil life, but he wanted to control the religious life. Now it so happens that his mother was called Helena, and she was something of a nagger by all accounts, and she probably nagged him to death to accept Christianity. But what he saw was that if we accepted Christianity and made it the one and only religion of the empire, not only do I control you during your life, I control you death as well. Because we're going to decide if you can go up to heaven or not. So he tried to do a deal with Sylvester's predecessor, but the guy simply said, no ways, I'm not having that. Sylvester, on the other hand, was rather more pragmatic. And he thought, well, hang about. I can make Christianity the one and only religion of the Roman Empire, the world as far as he was concerned. He thought, well, do I have to do a few deals to do it? Yes, I'll do them. Well, what deals did he have to do? Well, we have some problems, Sylvester, says Constantine. Yeah. I've got to sell this to the Roman people. So, guess what? Jesus, he can't die on the cross. I mean, for goodness sake, a nobody to die on a cross. Well, how about died, buried, and the third day he rose again from the dead and ascended into heaven. Oh, wonderful! It's Constantine, just what we need. But all the gods of the Roman Empire, they're all sort of divinely born. You can't really have him sort of the son of a carpenter and so on. So what do? Well, let's think about this. How about this? God came down in the form of the Holy Ghost an impregnated Mary. Wonderful, just like Zeus did to in the form of a bull to Europa, and Jupiter did in the form of a swan to Leda. Yes, yeah, they'll go for that. So this is what happens, and so we then have to say, well, yes, but he really has to sort of exist from the beginning somehow. Well, think about it. I wonder how we can do that. Well, I tell you what. How about he pre-existed at the beginning with God? Oh, wonderful. That will do it. One problem. We can't really admit that the Romans killed him. I mean, come on. We were going to make him a god, and the Romans, we went and killed him. We've got to change that. Well, I tell you what, the Jews are a bit of a nuisance, aren't they? How about if we make the Jews kill him? That's a good idea. We'll pretend that it was the Jews who went and arrested him, the Jews who shouted for him to be crucified, etc. Wonderful. We'll go along with that. So what's he do? He calls his council. Oh, and by the way, before that, after his little talk with Sylvester, he calls a council of all the bishops and what have you, and says, I have decreed that Sylvester is the continuator of it. In future he's going to be called the Pope. This was a Roman marketing plan to take over the spiritual aspects as well as the physical aspects. The descendants of Jesus protested, and Sylvester actually turned around to them and said, you are being written out of the Gospels. That's what he actually said.
There is evidence for
And there is evidence. Oh yes, Eusebius says this. Oh yes, and so does Malachi Martin, by the way.
I'm aghast as to how the Catholic Church can get around the fact that people like Eusebius, that they use as for evidence in other things, but they ignore
but only when it suits them. Only when it suits them. But I mean, even Malachi Martin accepts the fact that Sylvester actually said that. And what's more, Constantine then proceeded to literally have a policy of trying to kill off all the Desposyni. He actually had the policy of killing off all the people who had any relationship with Jesus. But then he killed his own brothers anyway to become emperor, so I mean, what the heck. They went underground, some of them went to India, they went abroad, some of them changed their names, they took coded names.
How is it then that the royal bloodline of the Davidic line that we're talking about here actually managed to get power?
What I think happened is this. Maria's father was a guy named John Cassian. Now, John Cassian is, so far as the Catholic Church is concerned, a desert father. But he's supposed to have raped a Jewish girl who subsequently died, and he took this daughter with him to wherever his desert hideout was. Mm-hmm. First of all, he was himself a descendant of Jesus, and he changed his name very carefully, right? Or taken a pseudonym at least. And I think what then happened is he probably was married to a high-ranking Jewish girl. I haven't been able to identify who that was. Well, I've got some ideas, but I think she was possibly of the Herodian dynasty. But certainly he didn't rape her, because if he had, he'd been stoned to death by the Jews. That was the thing. Yeah. So, he didn't rape her, that's quite clear.
So that's an addition from later on.
That's an addition from later on. Now, what I think happened is his wife probably died, but he had a young daughter to look after, so he took the daughter with him. Now, when the Visigoths sacked Rome, it was perfectly obvious to everybody. All of a sudden there was a new power. It wasn't the Roman Empire anymore. This was the Visigothic Empire. And he was sent, or arranged to be sent, to talk to Ataulf, officially to be able to convert him. Okay? What I think happened is that he talked to him, and it was agreed that Maria would become one of his wives, because he had other wives, okay? Not least of them Gallia Placidia, which of course is the only one that the Romans recognise. But I think it was agreed as a thing, you're a descendant of Odin, we're descendants of Jesus. Jesus was hung on a cross, had his side pierced with a spear. Odin hung on a tree, had his side pierced with a spear. Both became extremely wise as a result of all this. They're obviously the same person, and therefore, an agreement was made. That's what I think.
So we're saying that a descendant of Jesus,
Yep.
in Maria,
Yep.
was married off to
Yes. The Visigoths.
who the Visigoths came indirectly from,
Odin.
Yeah. Who was originally.
Okay. Odin originally was, first of all, the name Odin you get in not just one of them. There are a number of Odins, people called Odin.
So
First of them, it's effectively a title. It's rather like Pharaoh. It's God's personage on earth. Okay?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the first of those was kings of the Kassite dynasty. The Kassite dynasty of Babylon ruled between 1600 BC roughly to roughly 1150 BC. And the first of the known people called Odin was actually these two, Marduk Apla Idina, or Odin, and Zababa Shuma Idina. From there, they moved from Babylon, and they moved from here, Mesopotamia, up past the Black Sea, but they stopped first of all in Troy. Now, whether or not they actually founded Troy, I don't know, but it's a possibility. Certainly, one of their descendants called himself a Trojan. So there is the probability that they actually were the founders of Troy. One of the interesting things about it is that if you read the Iliad or the Odyssey, the Greeks made the assumption that the Trojans worshipped the same gods they did. In other words, the Temple of Athena, this, that, and the other. Balderdash. Not true. The work and research of my distant late cousin, Beau Gabriel de Montgomery, shows very clearly that the Trojans actually worshipped a deified Babylonian king. A king who was called Yuan, which is simply another form of Odin. Okay? And it means Lord or the One. That is it.
It's interesting that they worshipped a king.
Well, a deified king.
Worship is quite a big. The pharaohs, for instance, were
Precisely.
God
It's
king.
exactly what these people were.
Right.
That is what they had done. They had made one or more of their. Because remember, this is several hundred years afterwards, right? So they had taken the last of their Kassite dynasty, if you like, who they remembered as Edina, right? And they had deified him and built a temple to him. So they're now worshipping the person who had been their previous king. So, from Troy, they went up past the Black Sea and either went this way, along the Danube, or that way. Now, we don't know which. But we know that they got to this point because there is a little stone which they put up to note the fact that they had stayed there, and which is now in the Aberdeen Museum.
Oh, right.
Okay?
So archaeological evidence.
So archaeological evidence that they got there.
Yes.
And if they got started from here, that must have been one or other of their routes. We don't know the exact routes,
Yeah.
and we can't prove it. Okay? And we then know that they got across here to Gotland, and there are two further Gotlands in Sweden, Östergötland and Västergötland. Why Gotland? Well, I suspect that they were called gods by the local inhabitants, because they would have come to a region which was pretty primitive, and they would have brought with them an enormous amount of what to them would be new technology. Chariots, horses, chariot wheels, the ability to use ships, all sorts of things. Perhaps bronze working that they'd never seen before. So they would have been called gods, or Goths.
Yeah.
Okay? And so this was named after them. These were the Godlands. After, again, a few hundred, perhaps even 1,000 years, moved down into main Europe as the Goths, where they split and became the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths.
Yeah.
That is the point where we really start the genealogy of the God Kings from. The question is, why did they leave Mesopotamia? Why would you leave a beautiful country, flowing in milk and honey, if you want,
highly
to go?
fertile,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. It was the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah.
But why would you leave it? Well, the answer to that is what's called the Hand of Marduk. In roughly 1150 BC, a plague, a hemorrhagic plague, struck Babylon. Okay? And it was known as the Hand of Marduk. And what you have to appreciate is that as far as the Babylonians were concerned, their god controlled everything. So, if you were in favour with the god, you could be a king. If you were in favour of the god, you had good health. If you were in favour of the god, you could have good harvests. If something went wrong, if you lost a battle, or a plague hit you, it was because the gods had withdrawn their favour.
Yeah.
Precisely. So, what then happens? The plague strikes them. They, on that basis, have no option but to leave, because the god has withdrawn his favour. They have to find the god again.
Right, yeah.
And where did they find the god? In Troy. They made the king, their god king,
Right.
the Trojan.
That's the story.
That's the story.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, how can we prove this? We can prove it because in 1150, a mutation took place. It's called CCR5 Delta 32. And we can show that this not only took place there, but that afterwards, in about the year 700 AD, round about that time, the biggest concentrations of that particular mutation were in Gotland, Ostrogotland, Västergotland and Iceland.
So we get a disease causing
a mutation.
and that mutation appears.
Exactly, because that mutation gave them.
It's a unique stamp, isn't it?
It is a unique stamp, yeah. Because that mutation actually gives them immunity to the hemorrhagic plague, and incidentally gives them immunity to HIV-1, which is interesting. The Icelandic epic, Hyndluljo, okay, there is a passage in it which translates as, "But Radva was Raspa's son, those Guma were blessed by the gods." Now the Guma are actually the Sumerians. So this is saying the Sumerians were blessed by the gods. Why? Because the hemorrhagic plague arrived, and guess who was immune to it? The Sumerians.
Incredible.
So here we have an Icelandic epic which actually shows what we can prove by scientific methods. When they finish up in Sweden and Gotland and so on, they became known as the gods, because they were so much in advance of the inhabitants there. And I suspect that therefore the inhabitants considered Odin to have been a god, but of course he had a representative on Earth.
You know, cutting to the chase, we've actually got a family, a bloodline that left Sumeria a long time ago.
1150 BC.
Perfect. End up as Vikings.
End up as Vikings. Yes.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Who were married into the bloodline of Jesus,
Yep.
the Davidic bloodline.
Yep.
With the power and might of the Vikings.
Yep.
As a warrior race.
Absolutely.
In many respects, they terrified Europe and even further.
Yep.
You know, they went quite a long way. It's Constantinople itself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So they were powerful. They'd also joined up with the Celtic Church in some areas.
Yes.
Who we know.
That was slightly later.
Slightly later,
Yep.
but we do know. We now have an inkling as to why they might have joined up with the Celtic Church.
Why not? Because it was to oppose Rome.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I mean, at their apogee, the Olvungas ruled not only half of Scandinavia, but Russia, Normandy, large chunks of France, England, Scotland, southern Italy, Sicily, North Africa, Cyprus, and the whole of Palestine.
They became an extremely powerful family.
In fact, they even managed to get their own man in as Pope. Calixtus II was an Olvunga, through and through. If you have a look at the people like the Chamberlains, right, and the people like the Chancellors, they all happen to be Olvungas as well. Yes.
Incredible. Total control.
Total control.
So, are the Montgomerys related to the Olvungas?
We are an Olvunga family, yes.
So you're an extremely powerful person.
No, not really. But my family has
Your
been.
family?
My family has been.
Yes, you have an incredible... I mean, even your father was still a very powerful man.
Yes.
More powerful than the majority of people.
Oh, yes. Well, we at one stage, I think I was related to about, when we still had hereditary peers, I think I was related to about 50% of them. But it's not power in the sense that you exercise it. It's just there.
Do you know anybody that knows that they are members of this Davidic?
Oh, yes.
Other than yourself?
Oh, yes. Oh, large numbers.
Really?
Oh, yes.
And they know that they are members of the bloodline of Jesus?
Oh, yes. Well, they always have done. I mean, some of these documents have been held by these families for generations.
Families?
Yes.
In existence now?
Yes.
Know that they are members. They
are
bloodline descendants of Jesus?
Yes, of course. The Da Vinci Code is based upon the Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Okay? Let's be quite clear about it. It is plagiarism from Michael Bagent. Michael Bagent is a friend of mine. Michael Bagent based part of what he wrote, because he only saw some of them afterwards, on documents that I've showed you. He actually has seen at least one of those documents, and he actually says so in, I think it's the something in Templars, about Templar and the Lodge or something, and he actually says he's been shown a group of documents.
And they were your documents?
And they were my
that we could just see?
That you've just seen. Michael refused to give up this idea of the power of sound.
Yeah.
Right. Because basically if he said, well, I'm sorry I made a mistake, all his sales would dry up. I understand that.
Yeah, I know, but honesty is more important.
Well, okay, but that's a fact. But, yes, part of what he said is true, but of course the whole thing about the Merovingians is a load of claptrap, for the simple reason the Merovingians were the ruling family of France anyway. A friend of mine who is another academic lived in New Zealand. He actually discovered a rather interesting thing, and that is that up until quite recently, well, first of all, we have to understand that in all the noble families, you married for reasons other than love, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was all arranged marriages, okay? So, but what you had to do is you had to be careful you didn't interbreed too much.
Yeah.
And what Dan discovered was a thing that he called the knight's move. Okay? Just like the knight. You marry out for 2 generations, and you marry back in. You marry in for 2 generations, and you marry out. And if you have a look at all the lineages, you will find that time and time and time again over 1,000 years. If you take the old hereditary House of Lords, I would guess that except for the newly ennobled ones, certainly the ones which are prior to say 1200, they would all be Oldenburg.
Ooh, it's major power.
Yeah. The Washingtons were all Wungers.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Washingtons of Norfolk.
No.
Of course. Oh.
This is unbelievable.
No. Because there was this sort of, what should we call it? The War of Independence, if you like. It split. I mean, we had, for example, General Montgomery, who was on the side of the Americans, died at the Second Battle of Quebec after all Montgomery in Alabama is named,
And this wouldn't have to be in memory of your family.
Oh, yes, of course it was, yeah. The fact that it's Jesus as opposed to, I don't know, someone else, is of only minor interest. What is more interesting is not that this guy was... I mean, I don't care whether I was descended from Jesus or Thomas or Judas or what have you, it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to get at is it's what they represent, which was the Davidic bloodline, which in turn goes back even further. Now, that is what's interesting. And if I then take the Odonic line back, and if those two happen to meet
So join
somewhere,
up.
isn't that
The
fun?
Grand Ouroboros.
Yeah, isn't it fun?
Well, it's fascinating.
What to me is important is to try and get the truth out there, right? To try and overcome 2,000 years of church propaganda and actually say, well, can we please have a look at the real evidence? And I'm not suggesting that anyone who is descended from Jesus and that or what have you is particularly better than was. That isn't the point of it. Nothing to do with it. It is simply a question of what is wrong is that the church has scrambled the minds of people. They have brainwashed them so that they could have power. And in a sense, if this line is important at all, its only importance is to oppose the power of the church.